before we got started. I think we're almost there. I wanted to introduce myself. Oh, there's a few more people joining now. It's always the way. So I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Angela, and I'll be hosting today. We also have Eve with us.
Hello.
And Eve will be answering any questions that you may have. And of course, we have Paige with us as well, all the way from sunny England. Yes, sunny over there, winter over here. So it's a bit nice to see your background. Thank you. I also wanted to, before we started, I wanted to thank QBD Books. They have stocked Paige's book, so you can actually order that if you wished online. Or alternately, you can pop into the library and put a copy on hold. You can phone the library during opening hours and put a copy on hold, or you can do it online through our website or our app. So there's lots of ways where you can get hold of Paige's books if you so wish. I'd also like to thank Penguin Random House for allowing us to host Paige today. If during the course of the discussion that we have with Paige, you have any questions that you would like answered, please use the question and answer tab at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see that tab, if you move your mouse around, the bottom bar will pop up and you'll be able to ask your questions there. At the end of the chat, Eve will ask any questions that you present to Paige. So if that's all good, I will start. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's nice to see so many people online on this wintry night. Hope you've got your drink and your cup of tea and hot chocolate, whatever you're drinking, and some refreshments, so we can get started. Okay, so Paige, I think if I looked correctly, you have 14 published books.
It's actually 18, but it's 14, 14 women's fiction, 3 young adults, and a collection of short stories. So.
Excellent. I was wrong. So 18 published books. So that's really impressive. You are in England now. So how is it in England at the moment, weather-wise and corona-wise, all of the stuff that's important in the world today? How's it going over there?
It's actually it's a bit cloudy and windy today, but it has been really, really warm. Like I think it was like the hottest May on record since records began, last month, and it's been a bit full on. And I just want to show readers my Tessa because I got this little puppy a while ago, and when I started to look how big she is now. When I started doing all these online events, she was so tiny, and like in five weeks she just grown so big. So I know at some point she's going to want to get down. So I'm, right now she's sitting. Oh, you go, yeah, hello. So she's my lockdown puppy. But we were going to get a dog next year, and just decided to bring it forward a year. Now seeing as so many holidays and research trips were going to be cancelled. So this is our little pup. Her name's Tessa. Yeah. But dog is obviously for life, not just for coronavirus, I always like to say, we've been talking about getting a dog for years, and just sort of putting it off till next year, but yeah, now is the time.
Well, you're probably spending a lot more time at home at the moment, so it is a good time.
The thing is, my husband and I both work from home anyway, so we're always at home, so we've, it's the only reason we haven't had a dog so far is just because I remember the responsibility and just being able to go out. I used to have a dog. I inherited the family dog when my parents moved abroad. So I had, a King Charles Spaniel for 7 years of my 20s. And I still remember, just sort of the responsibility of, not being able to just, stay out for dinner or anything. You had to always come home and look after the dog. So it was like having a child. But yeah, so we put it off. But now we've got her, we're happy as can be.
Hasn't eaten any of your socks or shoes yet?
No, we've put them out of reach on the whole. She did actually manage to chew through my flip-flop or my thong, as you call them. So I was a bit gutted about that because they were my favourite navy and neon pink ones. I can't get any more. But yeah, that's the only real casualty. She's a good girl, aren't you? Yes, you're a good girl. Yeah. Anyone is like, is this about books or is this about animals?
No, it's about the book. So I love the first question about the book. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, so there are two parts to the inspiration, and the first, like the initial idea for the book came from Hannah's backstory, and I can't talk too much about that without giving it away because it's a bit of a, you know, twist of something happened to her when she was a child, and that idea came to me after watching a film on the way to Australia last Easter, and I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there was a small reference to these babies in this film. Which, yeah, like I said, it's hard to sort of say which film it is without giving it away. But I thought to myself, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning, imagine being that child sort of like 25, 20, you know, 26 years later, you know, how they would feel about this situation, about, you know, what with their parents. And, you know, it inspired the idea, and I sort of bolted awake, you know, and sort of started thinking about it. I was like, oh, I have to write that story. And then I'd had another idea. A friend of mine had gone to see an optician and got the giggles, and, you know, because they were quite hot, and you're sort of up really close, you know, when you go for an eye test. And so the idea of sort of having to get up close and personal with someone who you found physically attractive, I thought was like just a fun way to start a novel. So in the case of Hannah and Sunny, Hannah's, you know, the dispensing optician, and she looks out the window, she's at work, and sees this hot guy out on the pavement, and then he comes in for his appointment, and he kind of, you know, like does get the giggles a bit with her, you know, they're sort of up close, there's a bit flirty, you know, and she doesn't do long-term relationships, so when she finds out that he is a photographer and is heading back to Amsterdam, you know, 2 weeks later, she's like, well, you know, when he comes to pick up his glasses in 2 weeks, maybe that night, you know, that'll be the night, we'll just have a one-off. And so anyway, when he comes back in to pick up his glasses, he can't even look her in the eye. You know, something has happened in his life which has, you know, really kind of messed him up. And yeah, and so that, then his idea for his whole backstory started emerging. But I wasn't, you know, it's kind of, it's my lightest and my darkest book to date, I would say. You know, there's lots of joyful, fun moments, you know, a lot of chemistry between them. Neither of them do long-term relationships for very, very different reasons. And writing about that relationship growing, you know, and basically Sonny has sworn himself off sex. You know, his way of dealing with his problem is to get therapy and to build lasting relationships by not having sex. And so, you know, these two, like I say, the chemistry between them, because they can't do anything, they can't sort of, you know, take it further, they become friends, you know, and actually really begin to care about each other. And so it was a lovely book to write, you know, because you were never too far from happier times, even as the backstory starts sort of unfolding.
That was going to be one of my next questions, is about how you had the eye health in that book, specifically how you had it, like what gave you the idea to link it with homeless people?
There are a lot of homeless people in Cambridge. You know, you walk the streets and see a lot of homeless people. And I wanted Sonny, because he's a photographer, and, you know, I knew that there was going to be some sort of inspiration with him sort of photographing Hannah's eyes, because, you know, she's got really unusual eyes, and I wanted that to sort of, you know, to prolong their kind of up close eye contact for a bit longer. And as part of his therapy, you know, he wants to start doing something good. You know, he sort of feels like he's had a bit of a meaningless lifestyle, you know, up to this point. And yeah, I think the idea just sort of sprang to me out of nowhere, you know, based on seeing homeless people in Cambridge. And when I started looking into it, you know, I realised, I was, you know, I started thinking, what if you had, you know, if you had bad eyesight and were homeless, like how, you know, how do you rectify that? Is it easy to get sort of free eye care? And it's not, you know, like you have to be registered for benefits in order to receive free eye care, and you know, and the only way to do that is to have a permanent address. So it's really tricky. And I started, you know, so once I looked into it, I was really disappointed. So it was nice to be able to highlight that issue. And there are charities out there that, you know, over here in the UK, it's called Vision Care for Homeless People, you know, and I'm going to do some auctions with the book, you know, to try and raise money for them and some other homeless charities in the coming weeks. So if anyone wants to, you know, visit Paige Toon author, facebook.com, Paige Toon author, I would definitely be posting about that. Sort of, hopefully I'll manage to get it live this week, but, you know, to win sort of signed books and things, you know, in order to raise money as well.
Excellent. Some of your characters, I always like, when I'm reading a book, sometimes I'll Google different things that kept my interest. And one of your, the mention of a character was the Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. and I actually didn't realise that he was a real person. A
Yeah.
lot of readers will probably know that he is, but I didn't know that. So, and also I didn't know that the looking into the eye for the 5 minute thing was an actual thing, like that
Yeah.
people did it for that intimacy. And so I did try that myself with my husband, but it wasn't. It was very funny. You don't usually look at people for 5 minutes in their eye that closely without,
Yeah.
usually something else is going on. Um, so do you always mix a bit of that fact with fiction, like
Yeah,
with your
yeah,
book?
always. I try and like on the whole, everything that you see in the book is real. Like I've always wanted to write about real places. I'll write about sort of real restaurants and real bars. I remember Lucy in the Sky sort of writing about places in Sydney that actually existed. And sadly, going back several years later and seeing that they'd closed down or changed hands and weren't the same anymore. But on the whole, and I get so many readers writing to me saying, I went and did this, I went and visited this place and, sort of saw this, went to this bar and, they go and try and see the right thing. And Adelaide, I've written about real bars in Adelaide, quite a lot, sort of like so going up Hindley Street and, checking out all those new bars and, yeah, writing about East Terrace and, yeah, so it's a nice thing to do to make it real because I find that if I set it in real places, I can go to those places and really picture myself in the heroine's shoes, really sort of put myself there and sort of see what she's seeing and write about it, so it sort of feels more real, I think, both to me and to the reader. And, the same thing with like mentioning real people or real books, it just kind of sets it in reality. So it just feels even more kind of relatable, I think. Yeah. And I'd read that book, that stress book. Someone had recommended it to someone I know, and I thought that'd be, it seemed like there was some really good, tips in there, and this eye contact thing, was really relevant to the book. So I thought, well, that's good. I'll include it somehow.
I know that you're obviously living in England now, and you've lived in Australia as growing up, was it, as a child?
Yeah, my entire family, going back generations, are Australian. So
Okay.
I was actually born in England, but only because I was here at the time, and within 3 months I was back in Australia. And I went to school in Australia for my first sort of 14 years. I used to do tutoring when I was elsewhere in the world. Sorry, you finish your question before I
No,
carry on.
no, that's fine. I was just going to ask, have you been back to Australia much?
Yes, because my like I say, my entire family are all in Australia now. Initially, my parents and my brother, we moved over here when I was, well, we used to spend basically. My dad's a retired racing driver, so we used to spend half the year in Australia, and which is where I went to school, and the other half either in America or in England, depending on where he was racing at the time. Because he did sort of like sports car racing, and he won Le Mans in '83, and did IndyCar racing, and raced in the Indy 500, and so it just sort of depended on where what type of cars he was driving. And so we used to have a tutor when we were over here, and I've sort of said a couple of times to readers, don't fret about the homeschooling that you're having to do right now, because they'll catch up. It's not a big deal to miss out on 6 months of schooling or just to be doing a small amount at home. Kids do catch up because I used to only do 2 hours a day for 6 months a day, 6 months of a year, until I think 13 was when I went to full-time school. Like I was 13 before I actually did a full year of schooling. I'm just going to put Tessa down because she's like munching away on this on my lap, and she's making a bit of noise. I don't know whether or not you can hear her, but you go on your mat, good girl. Okay, girl, yeah. She sat there very nicely. But yeah, so growing up in Australia, it still feels like home to me. And like I say, so many of my friends, I know I WhatsApp one of my friends this morning, Jane Hampton, and I just saw her name on the participants, but Jane is someone who she reads all of my books for me before they go to print, and helps me sort of like she always does like a great kind of once over to make sure that I haven't got any mistakes in there. But she's also great because sometimes I'm writing about Australian characters. I often there she is, she's saying hello to me now. I can see. Thanks for tuning in, Jane. But she's just fantastic at English. She's always been really, really good at that sort of stuff. So being able to kind of give it a once over sometimes, and just check for mistakes, but also, like I said, the Australian things, because I've lived in England for so long now, I can sometimes, I'll forget, forget that whether or not you use this turn of phrase, or does this sound properly Australian. I've got another couple of Aussie friends, my sort of old friend from school, Bridie and Naomi, and they used to read my earlier books as well, and just sort of double check that it was sounding Australian enough, so I've often, it's just nice to still have that Aussie link with old school friends.
So I noticed in some of your other books, I've got a couple here, but you do mention different parts of Australia in your books. And I know you mentioned Lucy in the Sky, which I read last week. That's set mostly in Sydney. So did you move around while you were in Australia, or you only lived in Adelaide?
Only lived in Adelaide. We lived in the Adelaide Hills. And my initial idea for Lucy in the Sky, which is this one, normally we've got the cat bowls up here, the cat bowls, because we've had to put them out the way for the dog, but every time I do an event, I move all of my books through into the living room, line them all up. They're not normally like this. They're normally like piled in a mess out in my office. But Lucy in the Sky was about this girl who gets on a plane to Australia, and just before takeoff gets a message from her boyfriend's phone, which she thinks is from him, saying, "I've slept with your boyfriend 4 times in the last month." And then she has this horrible 24-hour flight to Australia. So basically, I came up with the idea for Lucy in the Sky about this girl who's torn between 2 countries and 2 men when my parents had moved back to Australia. And, I'd spent all of my teenage years living in England, and in my 20s when I'd already met my husband-to-be, and basically my parents moved back to Australia with my brother, and I had a great job. I was working at Heat magazine, I was a reviews editor there. It was like the biggest magazine in the UK at the time, selling like 600,000 copies a week, and it was just so much fun to be part of this enormous kind of phenomenon. And my parents moved back to Australia, and I felt so homesick, felt so torn between the 2 countries, that I came up with this idea about writing about this girl who was sort of torn between them. And initially I wanted to set Lucy in the Sky in Adelaide, because it was my hometown, in Mount Barker, in the hills. I went to school at Mount Barker Primary and Mount Barker High School. And, I wanted to set it all around that setting. And I remember my brother saying to me, "I think you should set it in Sydney for your first one, because that is so instantly recognisable to people. They can picture the Opera House, they can picture the bridge, and the harbour." And so I did. I took his advice, but I'd only been to Sydney once. And so I was just really lucky that when I got a book deal, based on the idea and 3 chapters. And, I had like 3 months to write it with a full-time job. And during that time, I was also coming to Australia for my mum's 60th birthday. And so when I flew over, Mum came with me to Sydney. And it was amazing, I've done it ever since. I've set books in real places and tried to go there if I can, and just spent some time she was just driving me around. I was like just writing in a notepad the whole time, what I was seeing, imagining what Lucy would be seeing as she drives from the airport to Manly, the beaches and the surfers and, the little houses in Manly and, the different cafes and stuff, and just writing as much as I could and incorporating as much of what was real into the story to make it feel really real. So yeah, since then, if I go somewhere in Australia, like in 5 years from now, this one, that's the Australian cover, and it's slightly different in the UK. It was this one. But in this, there's a section where they go to Uluru, and I'd been to Uluru that Easter with my family. It was 3 years ago now. And so I thought, well, if I go somewhere, I like to incorporate it into the book. And so a lot of the places in Australia that I've written about are places where I've been on holiday, and then managed to incorporate it. Sometimes I've gone there actually on research trips to do it properly. But now I've set 2 books, I think, two full books. The Sun in Her Eyes, which is... And this one is also set in the Adelaide Hills, and it's also set around the same place. But Pictures of Lily, it was my 4th book. This is my 4th book that I finally did, the book that I really wanted to do, which was set it all in the Adelaide Hills, and write about Mount Barker and Mount Lofty and the Cleland. It's set basically at the Cleland Conservation Park. The characters work there, and she goes and does some work experience. She's only, how old's Lily? I think she's 15. When she first moves to Australia, and then you pick up again with her later when she's living in Sydney. And yeah, so I like to write about real places, and definitely like to write about Australia. And the last one's got a section where she's down in Australia on the Murray River, and her parents live on a houseboat on the Murray River. And so, be able to, I went there again, that was last Easter with the family, and I just thought it'd be nice to incorporate what I can into a story, because, like I said, it makes it more real.
Well, I definitely liked that Lucy got the right man at the end. Would not have been a good ending if she'd have chosen differently there. With your new book, the Minute I Saw You, the one we're here talking about, how do you name your characters? Because I noticed, like, the optician, is it Yumiko? Is that how you say?
Yeah, Yumiko, yeah.
So how, because I think that's quite an unusual name. So how did you choose your characters' names?
Because she's Japanese, so I basically was looking up, I wanted her to be, it just sort of popped into my head that she was going to be Japanese, and so then you just search up online, Japanese female characters and female names, and try to find something that you think fits or that just sort of works. And I had this image of her in my head, and that name just sort of seemed to fit with her. And it's the same with Sonny, I had this image of him in my head being quite cool, he's sort of like slightly retro, looking, and just, he's got sort of like this pushback hair, and I'd seen a picture of a male model online when I was looking up trying to find a picture of his hairstyle, and and I knew what he sort of looked like, but I wanted to see it, and I could just see this guy, and it just, the name just seemed to fit, it was a name that I remember, when I had my son, I met someone who had a son called Sonny, and I thought it was kind of cool, but then when you find out a little bit more about his backstory, his parents aren't cool, so why would he be called Sonny? And anyway, so his real name is James. He got called Jimmy as a kid. His, granddad started nicknaming him Sonny Jim, and the Sonny bit stuck. So, it's kind of, the characters evolve, along with their names sometimes as you're writing. There have been times in the past when I've written an entire book, Chasing Daisy, actually, which is this one. I wrote the entire book, and we could not think of a title, and the book was about to be printed, and we still couldn't agree on this title, and my publisher was saying Love in the Fast Lane. I was like, no, I hate this, and my brother came up with the title Lucy in the Sky, and initially her name was Meg, but I hadn't written the book, I'd only written a synopsis, and I remember sort of saying to him, help me come up with some titles, and he just wrote back Lucy in the Sky, and a couple of other things, like frequent liar points instead of flyer points and things like that. So I put that on the back. But yeah, so once I sort of, once you have a name, I just did a word, find and replace and change the heroine's name. So Daisy, when I wrote this entire book, was actually called Anna, which readers will find really weird, I think, because I've, got so many Chasing Daisy, sort of really passionate Chasing Daisy fans. But, I think it's a really pretty sort of name, and it's really important to get the name right and the cover right. When everyone says don't judge a book by its cover, that's just, you always judge a book by its cover, because, at the end of the day, the publisher are trying to tell you something about the book by, showing you what it looks like on the outside, so you kind of get an idea, that you're looking at a reasonably, hopefully a good page turner, sort of beach read, something light-hearted, but also a little bit darker.
So you touched on it briefly there when you said that some of your characters, they get better over time, or they adapt, and you fill them out. Do you ever just totally have a whole scene running in your head and you just have to write it? Is the scene already there before you've even thought about titles and things like that with your book?
I mean, so it's lovely when you get the title at the beginning. I loved writing Lucy in the Sky and knowing the title. 5 years from now, I knew the title. 13 Weddings, I knew the title. Quite a few of them. Longest Holiday, One Perfect Summer. Often that sort of comes just as I'm writing the book. Minute I Saw You was when I was writing the book. I was actually well into it. But in terms of the actual story, I write my books really quickly, and just always have ever since Lucy in the Sky. When I, the guy, my publicist too, he ended up being my publicist, but he was a friend, and he said to me, you should write a book, love, you get a book deal, you work at Heat magazine, and I had the idea for Lucy in the Sky and told him the idea, and it's ridiculous, but a week later I met with my soon-to-be editor, Suzanne Babineau, who was Jackie Collins' editor, 30 years in the business, really experienced. She's been my editor for 14 years, and I met with her, and she loved the idea, and I'd written 3 chapters that weekend, and the synopsis, and had been thinking about this book for years though, so to then come and actually write it, even though I was slightly terrified. And Nigel said, basically Suzanne gave me a book deal. She offered me a 2-book deal within 2 days of a meeting, based on 3 chapters and on the synopsis, and we had the title by then, thanks to my brother. But and Nigel then said to me, this is the publicist, he said, I tell you can write it by Christmas and have it out next April. And so I thought, well, okay, and God, no, I don't know what I was thinking, but it really worked, having this tight deadline to work to, just kept me so focused. I had a full-time job, but I was, writing in my lunch breaks and before work and after work and, every weekend, and ended up writing it in 2.5 months. I had 3.5 and I finished it in 2.5. And ever since then, I've just sort of found that time of year for me really works, so September, October, November. So I tend to just do almost all of my writing in that time. But I've been thinking about the book for a good year, usually. In the case of The Minute I Saw You, I actually only came up with the idea last Easter. So, I only sort of thought about it for a few months before I started writing it, which is quite rare. Usually I've got at least a year. But I just loved I loved the idea so much, and was so sort of instantly wanting to write Hannah's story, based on having this idea, that I ended up saying, right, I'll write that book next, and I'm going to write this one now, so, and straight away those characters came to life inside my head, and they just really develop once you're starting writing and you've done all the research. So I spend sort of like quite a lot of time sort of researching all of my characters and all of their interests, and even though so many of them are into things that I'm not into, so like in the case of the one we fell in love with, which is about triplets, identical triplets, and I went to school with identical triplets, which Jane, who I know is watching, will remember remember our identical triplets we went to school with. And I sort of had this idea for these sort of 3 girls who felt like they were like celebrities. You're like, oh, she's one of the triplets, she's a triplet, but at home they're like one of 3, and I sort of had this idea for writing about these 3 girls who have this gorgeous guy who moves in next door, and they all fall for him. But that was a really tricky book to research, because it wasn't just one person I was having to understand, it was 4, including him. And one of them, Phoebe, she goes rock climbing, that's her thing, she sort of climbs. Could not think of anything worse, but I had to learn about rock climbing, and even though I didn't write about it that much, I really wanted to make sure I fully understood her character. So yeah, I always do spend a lot of time sort of getting to know the characters, before I come to write about them. I do ramble a lot, don't I? I hope the readers are actually finding this interesting and not just me going off on one.
I know, I think it's very interesting, the mind of a writer, and how you formulate what you're writing about and how it all comes to fruition. So it's really good to hear. I'm going to hand over to Eve now, though, and see if there's been any questions from our audience.
There has been so many audience questions. Everyone's been loving it, Paige. And the first one's from who I think might be one of your biggest fans, Shannon.
Hey, Shannon!
She said she's made it to all of the author talks so far that you've done, and she's even teed up her work break. I think she's in the UK, so that she can sit and listen in now about getting into trouble. Her question is, are you going to be doing a book tour in the near future in the UK? Obviously lockdown permitting, and please won't you come to Yorkshire?
Oh, see, yeah, I've known that Shannon's been checking in. We've been in contact on Instagram, and she works for a care home actually, so she's been having quite a bit of a hard time of it through this pandemic. But thank you so much for tuning in. I can't believe her. She only messaged me last night to say, oh, I've got to work tomorrow, I'm not going to be there. So she's here. So yes, definitely I will do another book tour. I've done them the last couple of years. I try and team up with my author buddy Lindsay Kelk, and the year before we teamed up with Giovanna Fletcher as well, and that's really fun. This is very different to what I do on my author talks, because with those, it's the 3 of us, or 2 of us sort of sitting up on a stage and just chatting to each other and asking each other questions, and then it's so much more immersive than having like it just through your computer. And some of these author talks I've had to do, I haven't even been able to talk to a human. I've just had to talk at my computer screen for an hour, which is much harder. So yeah, definitely be back to doing those. Hopefully next year. We'll just have to see how things play out. It's all a bit of a weird times that we're living in. But definitely, I'll be up to Yorkshire, because my next book's going to be set in Yorkshire. So luckily, I think from mid-July, I think it's the 4th of July, we're allowed to actually go and camp at places. So I'll be going up to getting up to Yorkshire and doing a bit of a camping trip. So I go there a lot. My husband's from Yorkshire, so we go up there quite a lot anyway. It's such a beautiful part of the country. So even if I didn't manage to make it, I could still write about it. But it's always nice to go there with the book in mind and the characters in mind, and really focus and make it as real as possible.
I think Shannon will be very pleased to hear that. The next question comes from Jodie. Who are the authors who inspire you, and who do you enjoy reading?
I was always inspired by Marian Keyes, was someone who really inspired me to start with. She's like one of my favourite authors. And I just think that she does heartbreaking and, hilarious so brilliantly, I would never be able to do it to that extent, But yeah, she's amazing. But it was funny, when I got a book deal, I found it really hard to write. It was really hard to read while I was writing, because I was just, I thought I would read something like Marian and would just think, oh my God, I'm so rubbish, in comparison, that it would just put me off being able to write. So I stopped reading, and then I had my son, and I think the first book I read, again, was Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. And, and it sort of spiraled this massive love for sort of young adult, fantasy, sort of dystopian fiction. I loved sort of reading that sort of stuff. And one of my favourite authors is Cassandra Clare, because she's written like The Mortal Instruments, but she writes about forbidden love, and it's just so brilliantly. And there are so many different ways that she can keep her characters apart, which don't just involve them having a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. So yeah, I'm really inspired by Cassandra Clare, definitely.
Angela and I were talking earlier about what Twilight fans we are too.
Yeah, well, just that chemistry, that chemistry is just incredible, so yeah, definitely inspires me.
Now, the next question is, which of your books are you most proud of?
So I'm proud of all of them, but I think possibly the one we fell in love with, because that was really tricky to pull off, and there's so many different layers to it, which I don't think you wouldn't sort of realize as you're reading it. I hope you should just be able to read it and just enjoy every page. But because I was writing from the perspectives of 3 different women, and having to tell their story when they're in their 20s, but also do some flashbacks. There were diary entries involved in there, and there's a whopping great twist, which I had to sort of try and pull off, and get my readers to, have that moment of like, kind of like that, and so to know that I did pull that off, and that so many readers, had that moment and wrote to me afterwards, and and it got chosen for a big book club read, it was like a Zoella book club read over here, so it was really, that is probably that one that I'm most proud of, I'd say. But 5 Years From Now also has like I feel very close to that one. Found it very, very hard to start writing my next book, or to think about writing my next book, like I say, I do so much thinking in the lead up to it, that it was hard to sort of move on to If You Could Go Anywhere, because 5 Years From Now was told about basically they're 5 years old when these 2 characters meet, and their parents fall in love, and when you finish the story, Nell, they're in their 40s, and so like you've been with them for such a long chunk of their lives that to sort of let them go was really hard. But maybe I'll come back to them one day.
Lovely. I love the Zoella book club too. I always try and read what she recommends. So the next one is, you've mentioned that you've written teen fiction previously. Did you enjoy writing for younger people, and how is it different than writing for adults?
I didn't find it different at all. I think when you're inside a character's head, and you're just basically inside their head, and if they're 15, then you're thinking like a 15-year-old. I hope, I think Jessie feels very, very, authentic. But so my books are all toppling over now. This is my last event, so I can put them away now for good. But yeah, so this is like The Accidental Life of Jessie Jefferson, is like the first in the series, and it's a spin-off of my adult books, Johnny Be Good and Baby Be Mine. And in those books, I went through a phase of I used to I still do, but on the whole now I write more about real women. But when I first started writing, and I was still working at Heat, I was very much inside the celebrity world. I used to write about real women for like one book, and then the next one would be about something different. So I wrote about just ordinary girl Lucy in the Sky, and then my next book, Johnny Be Good, she's an ordinary girl, Meg, but she goes to work for this world famous rock star, and so she's sort of projected into this kind of crazy world. And then Chasing Daisy is about racing, driving, and you know, sort of famous sort of racing drivers, and then pictures of Lily back to being ordinary again. And, you know, so I sort of like mixed it up quite a lot, you know, over the years. But this was really fun to write because she's basically the daughter that Johnny never knew he had. So she's you know, she doesn't know that her dad is a world famous rock star because her mum never told her who her real dad was. You know, she basically didn't want to lose her daughter to this rock star. But her mother in the book has passed away, you know, 6 months before. And you know, her stepfather, basically, she's gone off the rails a bit and is, you know, getting in with a bit of a bad crowd. And her stepfather tells her who her real dad is. So that was so much fun because the world that they lived in already existed in my mind. You know, I've written 2 books already on Johnny and Meg, and you know, their sort of amazing mansion in LA, and, you know, a nice mansion in the UK as well. You know, it's sort of, so it was already created. So then to just insert a 15-year-old into that world, you know, I wrote those books super quickly because, you know, I was just really connected to them. And the only difference really is that, you know, I try to make my books as realistic as possible. So even though they might be about sort of extraordinary circumstances, you know, I try to make them really, really real. So in the case of Jessie, you know, she was smoking, she was drinking, and I remember my publisher saying to me, she needs to stop smoking now. You know, she needs to have an epiphany and sort of stop smoking. You know, I don't think, you know, and Johnny sort of like had given up smoking, and in the book, you know, he kind of like starts smoking again because he's really, really stressed, you know. And so I had to have her, you know, him sort of like say to her, right, no, enough of this, you know, and her sort of respect him enough to stop. I'm not 100% sure that she would have stopped in reality, but because you have to be more responsible when you're writing for a younger audience, you know, then I had to sort of make that, you know, concession basically. And it was the right thing to do, especially now that my kid's getting a bit older. I'm really, really glad she gives up smoking, you know, because I'm going to be reading about it too. So, you know, and I find it really hard when I'm writing. Sorry about the dogs going mad barking. Can you hear? But you know, all of my characters swear, for example, you know, and I'm hating the idea of my kids sort of reading all my books now and them sort of swearing. You know, it's like, oh no, you know. Trying to be a good mum is hard.
Now, our next question, you did touch on it a little bit before, but what books and authors would you recommend to people who love your books?
I love Colleen Hoover. She's one that I read a lot of. I remember being asked to quote on her first book, Slammed, and there's this moment in it when I think his name's Will and Laken are the 2 characters, I think, and I haven't read it for years, but there's this moment when he meets her eyes and they can't have each other. Like there's a reason, which I won't spoil for you, but there's a reason why they can't be together, and just that moment when his eyes sort of rest on her and sort of stay resting on her in this situation where they should not be looking at each other at all, I couldn't stop thinking about it, you know, like it was just so powerful, this chemistry between them. And so she's one of my favourites. I think one of my favourite books that she's written is Maybe Someday, so I really recommend that. Recently I've been recommending Sally Thorne's The Hating Game a lot because I thought that was just so much fun. And in fact, if you look at my Instagram, which is Paige Toon author, I just recently recommended 6 books which are just all really fun, really good page turners, you know, lots of chemistry, and yeah, definitely go check those out. The Kiss Quotient was another one that I just read recently, which I thought was fantastic. Yeah.
Now, our last question, which is probably a good one to finish up on, from Sally. What's coming next?
Ooh. Right, so I've had this idea for a while because, like I say, the idea for the minute I saw you jumped in and I thought, right, I've got to write that one next. But this idea that I've been thinking about for a while feels really, really well formed and you know, real in my brain. And it's about this girl called Leah whose parents, when she was growing up, were foster carers. And so she used to share her home with troubled teenagers. And one of these teenagers in particular, she forms this sort of special bond with. And he's really sort of screwed up, you know, like I can't believe this actually happens, but in situations when social services get involved and there's a younger sibling and an older sibling, for example, the older sibling will be put into foster care and the younger sibling can often be put up for adoption, which just, and you know, and often they don't even get to say goodbye, you know, so these kids are sort of torn apart. And so that's the case, and you know, I want to write about that, you know, I want to write about these scenarios and you know, highlight that a little bit. So he's, you know, George, his name is, you know, he's really very distressed about the fact that his younger sister has been put up for adoption. He hasn't, can't sort of see her, considering he raised her pretty much, single-handedly for the first few years of her life. And then it's told there's another boy involved, Theo, who is like the son of a local landowner, and he's got his own issues, like his parents are quite cold, and he's now back from boarding school because he's been expelled. And it's the story of the three of them, but it's told between then, when they were sort of 17, and now when they're in their 30s. And they've been sort of pulled apart and sort of separated, but Theo and Leah are actually married, but George has been off the scene for a long time, and he comes back. And I had this I read this song called "Don't Turn Around" by Amy Shark, and I remember listening to this song, and it's sort of about this idea of seeing someone again. And there's this one line where she says, we might meet again, she's sort of talking about meeting like at a wedding or dancing at a wedding or something like that. And then there's this one line which says, at a funeral, you're 2 rows behind me and it's hard to not turn around. And that just made me feel goosebumps. And I had this idea of sort of, setting the scene, early on in the book, where she's at a funeral and she can feel him right behind her, but, and just knows that it's inappropriate to sort of turn around and look, but just like the idea of writing that kind of level of chemistry of, sort of seeing this person again after all these years and knowing the history that you share. So yeah, I can't wait to write it. You can tell it's very vivid. I'm definitely thinking about it a lot at the moment. So I need to do a bit more research before I get stuck in, and I probably won't start writing until September, just because that's my thing. Thank you so much. Can I just sort of say thank you to both of you? First of all, thanks very much for hosting me. Thank you to Onkaparinga Libraries. Really appreciate it. It was so nice to do a South Australian library for my last event. This is my hometown, it's where I grew up, so it was really nice to do that. And thank you so much to all the readers who tuned in, and all those people who've been with me for these last few weeks of this book tour. If you want to ask any of your friends to tune in, you guys are going to put this live, right? You sort of stick it up on the website, so people can pop along and watch it still. And
we'll put on our website probably late tomorrow. People can access the link there. Did you want to mention anything about your hidden page?
Sure. Well, I write I write a newsletter called The Hidden Page, which I sort of developed because I wanted to be able to write sort of little short stories and things that were free to readers. And so you can sign up at paigetoon.com. And so if you go to paigetoon.com, it's got all my social media channels on there as well. I'm at Paige Toon Author on Twitter and Facebook, and so if I haven't answered one of your questions, or you think of something after the event, you can just tweet me or message me somewhere, and I'll reply. Not always straight away, but I get there eventually.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us tonight. For all of our listeners out there, if you want to follow more events like this, you can like our Facebook page and look on our website. And also tomorrow I'll send a link out to everyone that participated tonight to get some feedback about the event and what we can improve on, because we're always looking for good opportunities to improve. And we've got one more author coming up in July the 21st, and that's Josephine Moon. If you want to tune in.
Josephine Moon.
So tune in for her, and she's already on. She's on Eventbrite. You can book in for that. And yes, thank you everyone for joining in and asking questions and being part of this activity tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks from me too. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being in touch, Paige.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.